So I think if you watch my channel, you'll definitely all know Rochelle Kopp from Japan Intercultural Consulting. I believe that's the correct name?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Yeah, and of course we've done multiple seasons, successful, repeating seasons of Japan Business Time, talking about common challenges in both directions, cultural challenges of working in Japan. That I still get comments on how great it sort of undiscovered it is. It doesn't. The videos don't have a ton of views on them, but there's a disproportionate number of comments on those videos about how great they are, which is a reflection on the great experience that Rochelle has, and I love hearing her stories and advice around that sort of thing. I also, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I also follow Rochelle on Twitter, and I actually do retweet and from time to time things that she's doing. And one thing that stood out following you on Twitter, Rochelle, is you've been since living in Tokyo, moving to Tokyo and Fukuoka as well. I've noticed you getting involved in a bit of local activism on certain issues that interest you. And whenever you've had your petitions and so on, I have retweeted, but some I'll admit with more enthusiasm than others. But I still, I respect you and your judgment, so I do that. But one of the things that you've championed, and I'll stop talking in a minute, but one of the things that you've championed that I find super interesting is you've talked a lot about a lot of urban sort of redevelopments, particularly the Meiji Gaien project. But for example, when the Olympics was talking about cutting down, they said pruning, but it sounded a lot like cutting down trees in Inokashira Park to create a viewing area for a big screen for watching the Olympics. I think you made some noise about that, and they
I
canceled
made
that.
a little noise, yes, and they canceled it. Yes.
Yes, so successful. And then you heard that there were more trees in danger somewhere else in Tokyo, and you cranked things up again. And yeah, you've actually stood out as being they haven't canceled it, but you've been relatively successful, I think, at being one of the instigators of awareness about that project.
Yes, we've definitely helped with awareness. And in fact, at the end of June, a survey by the Tokyo Shimbun of voters in Tokyo showed that 69.5% were against the project.
Wow.
So I like to think I had something to do with that number.
I think you could take credit for that. You were the first person I saw raising it, and obviously, lots of like-minded people got together and did their own activism around promoting it. But clearly, you've been involved in that. But
I've
let's
been key people, but I do want to say there's been a bunch of Japanese activists working on it, and we've all been collaborating. So it's been a group effort.
Yeah. So let's step back a moment. So first of all, for people who are new to you, maybe a little bit of a jiko shokai of your general background and a little bit how you got into this. And then after, I would like to get into a little bit of a debate and ask you to sort of persuade me why I should care more about this than I admittedly do.
Okay, certainly. So I'll start off. Anyone who can listen can tell I'm from the United States and I've got a bit of a Chicago accent. I got interested in Japan when I was in high school, started studying Japanese in college, did an internship in Japan during college. After I worked in consulting in the US for a couple of years, but I wanted to get deeper into understanding Japanese business better. So I came to Tokyo and I got a job at a big Japanese bank that was busy globalizing and having lots of challenges doing so. And I had a front row seat to lots of cultural clashes. And I got really interested in how people from Japan and other countries can work together effectively, how people like me who weren't Japanese could be effective inside a Japanese organization. And I decided to focus on this area for my career. And I went back to the US, excuse me. And while getting my MBA, I started to research Japanese multinationals and their HR and cultural challenges. And then as I was doing that research, I realized that there was a need for specialized consulting. So started my own firm. I started it in the US. And then kind of my adult life have been kind of switching back and forth between living in the US and traveling to Japan a lot or living in Japan. And for the last few years, I've been in the living in Japan mode.
Yeah.
And so, as you said, well, I've been here in addition to doing my consulting work and doing some teaching, and I have a couple board positions at Japanese companies, which has been a really interesting thing been doing lately. I also am someone who lives here, and so I've gotten involved in things. And when I was down in Fukuoka, I was involved in the beach cleanups that Rachel and June were running. And
Mm.
I believe they are still running. And that was just an eye opener as to the plastic trash coming in out in the ocean, particularly that side of Japan. It really sensitized me to the ocean plastic problem.
Mm.
I've always been interested in environmental issues, and then here in Tokyo, I got involved last year with the Yoyogi Park and the public viewing for the Olympics, which made no sense to do in the middle of a pandemic, and got 150,000 signatures on a petition, and I got Koike to cave, and so there's not many people who can say they've done that. So that's kind of
Yeah.
I'm sort of proud of that. Um, and I'm trying again this year with another project, the Ginkgo Gaien one. So it's been my hobby as I've kind and this year particularly with the Ginkgo Gaien project, I've learned so much about urban development issues in Japan,
Mm.
about the various threats to trees in Japan. I've just become very interested in this whole topic because it's fascinating and it's also just extremely disturbing.
Okay. Well, so I'd love to get into that. Before we get straight into that, though, so look, from my perspective as a 23-year resident of Tokyo, and I can think of the urban renewal projects over the years that have garnered the most controversial comment. The ones that really stand out for me were maybe while you're in America, so you might not be so aware. In Omotesando, there was the Omotesando Hills project where they knocked out a bunch of quite nicely designed but old buildings, and they replaced it with a kind of a black monolithic sort of square modernist building, which I saw a lot of people opposed to. Just mainly based on aesthetics. They like the old buildings and they wanted to preserve these nice old buildings and, not have this ugly new building. Um, Another project that more recently that I think you were in Japan for was when they talked about renewing Harajuku Station from being the kind of
Right.
Swiss ski chalet into a building that doesn't risk crushing people physically to death when they pass through it on a busy day.
Right.
Um, and again, on that as well, in terms of Omotesando Hills, well, I will admit I don't like the design of the new building, but
I
my
don't like it either. Yeah. And
but my,
it's just a shopping mall. It's really boring.
yeah, um, it is. So where I'm coming from, and the reason that I'm generally not so I actually majored in international environmental law. I've worked at an
Oh,
environmental policy consulting thing. So in terms of making laws for renewable energy, I've drafted Japan's soil pollution remediation laws in Japan. I've been involved in that. I've been involved in drafting laws that relate to Japan's renewable energy laws and so on. So I've actually done a ton of stuff. I am interested in environmental stuff, but I'm not very sentimental about like urban conservation and renewal and stuff like that. And where that comes from is I've moved house 37 times in my life. Generally, as a kid, I grew up basically in. If you watch Steven Spielberg movies from the like early '80s and late 1970s, where they're always set in kind of like new suburbs and stuff like that under construction, where he grew up. I grew up in the same sorts of places in New Zealand, in Australia, army camps and stuff. So everything was always new. And what I love about Japan is the fact that old buildings just get torn down after 20 or 30 years. They don't even bother looking after them very well. And it's the constant renewal going on is the thing that I like about Japan.
mm,
It's new and exciting. And even a neighborhood that I think I know, I go back to 10 years later and it's totally different. The other thing that makes me generally skeptical, generally on these urban projects and so on. And even though I don't like Omotesando Hills, I still am fine with the renewal because I know I have friends who are architects and they are so underappreciated and underused and unloved in Japan. Typically, apartment buildings get built off engineering specs, but but architects are desperate for work, and there are all these repressed creative people who do wonderful things when you let them. And occasionally, these projects, when they actually hire proper architects, I always think it's great to have. I'm from a country where we're trying to preserve 100-year-old buildings all the time, and I always think, no, let people build new stuff that people like in the future. So that's my general bent. I like new stuff, and I like to give new people a chance to redesign things. I get excited, even if they screw it up, let them screw it up, and then we can knock it down and do it again soon. So generally speaking, my bias is towards being okay with renewal. And in terms of like wastefully cutting down trees and trashing the environment, I worry about that at a big level, but I worry about it less on an urban park basis. So while I respect and generally support your activism and I respect the results that you've gotten, I have to tell you, I'm just not. I'm not an enthusiastic, activist. I don't get on these trains when people are saying, "Yeah, we have to preserve Harajuku Station." That was awful, actually. And even the new crappy design is still. I hope some young architects get a chance to make some design from it, and when we try something with that, I know it's slightly different, but the Meiji Jingu renovation. I mean, itself. I don't know a lot about the project, but what I do know is, oh, one final thing. I live like 200 meters away from Meiji Jingu Gaien for like 6 or 7 years. My son was born in a house near there. I would walk through Ichonamiki, through the yellow trees, which are getting cut
Mhm.
down by this project. So actually, I should probably be much more invested in this than I am because it is a very sentimental. I live near the area, but it's also true that all those facilities are from the 1964 Olympics. They're some of the oldest sports and public facilities in Tokyo. So on the one hand, I'm very attached to it myself, including walking through that park and through those trees. On the other hand, I also appreciate, the rugby stadium and the baseball stadium are lovely, but they are old and they're not that well looked after. And the chance to build something new and exciting there excites me. So
The
that's
problem
my
is
that's where
they're
I'm
not
coming
new
from.
and exciting, they're new and awful. It's the problem.
Well, new and awful. So okay, but that's aesthetics. I still
Mhm.
prefer new over old by default, as I said. Even if even on
Well,
Multisando Hills, which is awful, I still prefer it.
mhm.
I still am not against it. So explain to me what's wrong. Generally speaking, why are you passionate about urban conservation, and specifically, what's wrong with this project that I should be more against it than I am?
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different issues. So there is the issue of all the trees that are going to be damaged, and it's 1,000. So it's a
It's a
lot.
thousand.
Eh, Yes, it's 1,000.
Do they have that many trees there? They have a lot of trees
Yes,
there, but how many trees
there
are in the
there
park?
are there are there's I think the total is something like 1,600.
So they're
So
going
it's
to destroy.
the majority of the trees in the park are either going to be cut down or moved, and trying to move old trees like that is basically a death sentence for them. So the scale of it is pretty large. Okay, so that's one.
Yeah.
You sound maybe not so sentimental of living near those rows of ginkgo trees, but a lot of people in Tokyo are very sentimental about them, as well as there's the cafes that are right next to the trees.
Yep.
Those are all gonna go away. There's gonna be a big wall of the new baseball stadium is planned for there. So that's
Okay.
one of kind of the lovely spots in Tokyo. Lots of people have had important life events at those cafes. It's a really popular date spot.
Just
It's a place that people like. So what
yeah.
is the point of doing urban planning if you destroy an urban environment that is rich and vibrant that people love? It's sort of like
Hmm.
what's the point, right?
Well, just
So
to
that's
double
that's
down
one
on me
issue.
being a terrible person,
Mhm,
the first ever
mhm,
restaurant that I took my son to was that cafe that you're talking about that they're going to be
mhm,
knocking down for a wall of the baseball stadium.
mhm.
So yeah, not only did I walk down that street of all those ginkgo trees, taking my son to childcare every day for 2 or 3 years, and it was a lovely walk. And that was the route that I would go. I'd go from Shinanomachi to Aoyama, and that was the way to go.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, those cafes as well. So I'm definitely sentimental about them, but at the same time, I'm still okay with letting them do something cool, do something new with that area. Or
But
I mean,
it's
they're
not
not
gonna
they're
be
not getting rid
cool,
of
it's
all
gonna
the
be a
ginkgo trees,
wall.
are they?
It's gonna
Are
be
they
a
gonna
wall. Yes, it's not gonna be the problem is it's not gonna be something cool because
okay.
the entire operating principle behind this redevelopment plan is not let's make something cool. It's not renew facilities that people love and are using. The
Mhm.
operating principle behind this is let's take the area where this stuff is, we're going to erase all of it with a big eraser, and we're going to move things around so that
Right.
we can build high rises and make money. That is the operating principle behind this plan.
I thought they were so I thought they were going to rebuild the sports. They were definitely going to move them around. The rugby field and the tennis courts and the baseball stadium are all getting relocated in this, and it sounds like they're moving trees as well. I presume not with the intention of killing the trees, although like we'll get to that, I'm sure. But
Mhm.
but I understood that the primary intention of this was not to like concrete it over with skyscrapers, but to actually
No, that's
update
wrong.
and
It's
and put in these new
skyscrapers.
sports facilities.
No, no, that's the whole real intention is putting in skyscrapers. And they're moving the sports facilities from where they are currently to make room for the skyscrapers.
Okay, but they are
That's
rebuilding
really
the
the whole
sports
point of the
facilities, though.
project.
There is gonna be
There
a
what?
baseball stadium. There is gonna
But
be a rugby
there
stadium and
is
a
gonna be a
baseball stadium
baseball
and a tennis
stadium
court.
and there's gonna be a rugby stadium.
Yeah.
Again, you talk about new and cool. Have you spoken to any rugby fans about the plans for the rugby stadium?
Well, Shibunomiya is kind of a disaster, as it is. I mean, again, Shibunomiya, the most sacred place for Japanese rugby, and yet because
Exactly.
they
Mhm.
but at the same time, because they couldn't redevelop the stadium, they couldn't organize themselves to redevelop the stadium fast enough, they couldn't use it for the Rugby World Cup, which was absurd. And that was because
Yeah,
they
it was
didn't
absurd.
redevelop it fast enough.
Yeah,
So
I'm not sure what the story was, why they couldn't do it soon enough,
they
but
didn't have the
my yeah,
capacity. Yeah.
yeah, they didn't have the capacity to build. I think
The
what I because actually this plan for Jingu Gaien
yeah,
has been started in the early 2010s. And
right.
so it was already in motion. So my guess would be the reason why they didn't rebuild the stadium for the World Cup is they were waiting to have this whole giant plan play
Oh,
out.
that's
Yeah,
100% it. And they knew well
yeah.
ahead of the Rugby World Cup that it wouldn't be all together in time for the Rugby World Cup. So it was surprising,
Mhm.
I think, to everyone. And to Waiwai, another New Zealand rugby fan there, definitely knows that. Yeah, everyone thought it was a bit strange that they had planned these big sports stadiums with like rugby with racing tracks around them that where spectators are very far away from the field. Whereas Shibunomiya used it very close to the field. But the reason it wasn't
Right,
allowed to be used for the World Cup was you have to have a minimum number of seating for spectators, which they needed
right,
to construct for, and they couldn't organize. You're right. I think it's linked to the whole reconstruction project. I don't know
yeah,
if the new field is
yeah.
actually going to be World Cup standard, however, but
Yeah,
but that
it's a
field wasn't serving
question,
the
and
purpose.
yeah, well, the new rugby stadium, they actually are not prioritizing rugby. They're
Mhm.
prioritizing making it into a money-making music venue. And so
Okay.
they're going to have a roof and they're going to have artificial grass, which when I talk to rugby fans, both of those are totally sacrilegious for rugby. Like, what is the point of building an expensive rugby stadium if it isn't really truly for rugby?
Okay. Again, I'm not going to be outrageous based on that. I like in Tokyo, looking after grass is so hard. Most rugby fields are dirt and they're painful and they're horrible and they give you infections. And actually, lately there've been a lot more artificial turf grounds. It's I must admit though, as the premier rugby ground, like, that represents the whole Japan Rugby Football Union, yeah, that'd be a bit strange to be on artificial turf, but generally speaking, I mean, American football games are pretty mu half of them are played on artificial turf now as well. There's that technology coming over, so, yeah, it doesn't okay, I mean,
The
the fact that they're
rugby
making
fans
it
I've talked to
more
are not happy
useful.
about it. Yeah. Well,
Okay,
more useful for what? I mean, the thing is, it's going to be right next to the new stadium that was built, new national stadium built for the Olympics,
right,
which is hardly used at all and is awash in red ink. It's a giant operating deficit every year. And
yeah.
so they're going to build another large facility right next to it. It's, another whole problem with this project is it's not a sensible use of taxpayer dollars.
How much taxpayer dollars are going in? It's not public. I don't think it's public land, is it? It's privately owned land. It's just there's some public money supporting the project, right?
Well, the public money supporting the project,
Yeah,
particularly the rugby stadium is a governmental because it's through the Japan Sports Promotion Council, which is
yeah.
underneath the Mombusho. So
By the way,
that's a public thing, and it's a public-private partnership. But yes,
for
and the most of Meiji Jingu Gaien is property of the Meiji Shrine. It was originally
tax free.
the government of Japan
Yeah.
land that was then given to the Meiji Shrine.
Right.
So it's it's not really completely private property because it was actually public property that was entrusted to the Meiji Shrine. And
Wow. So
one
they're
of the
probably
reasons
not even paying taxes on the land.
yeah, and then we'll talk about in a minute. You're right; they haven't been taking care of things.
Yeah.
Um, Also, you're talking about sports, and there's the two public stadiums in Ginkgo Gaien,
Yeah.
but there are also a whole bunch of other sports facilities that average people use. There
Mm.
are public tennis courts, there
Yeah.
are
There's a futsal
softball
court.
fields,
Yeah.
there's futsal courts, there's a batting dome, there are indoor ball courts, there is the second baseball stadium where they have a lot of high school games, and the second baseball stadium also serves as a golf range. It's one
Mm.
of the few golf ranges in central Tokyo. All of those other sports facilities under the redevelopment plan are going away completely, with the exception of there is a private, expensive tennis club, and that's going to stay. But
Okay.
all the other things that normal people would use are being eliminated with no plans for alternatives of any of them
Okay.
because they're
So,
making room for high skyscrapers.
but the other fundamental thing here is that this is privately owned land, and these are basically people are allowed to do what they want. They don't. They're not. There's no obligation on on the property owner to maintain what are now 70-year-old facilities.
Okay. Well,
You
but
know.
in this case, though, there is a zoning thing where the land is zoned for parked, so there's a
Mm,
zoning issue. But also it's zoned as a natural, landscape preservation area. It was one of those in Japan. So there's some zoning issues.
yeah.
There's also kind of a moral responsibility issue on the part of Meiji Jingu Gaien because one, this land was given to them by the government, entrusting them with the purpose to serve the sports needs of the people.
Mm,
Also, when the Jingu Gaien was originally created, there was at the same time as creating the Nyan, which is
mm,
the big park that's over by Harajuku with the trees and the forest. There was a whole project to create that forest, but at the same time they were creating Jingu Gaien. And so citizens from around the country contributed money. They literally sent trees.
mm,
So some of the trees in Jingu Gaien are kind of mismatched because a lot of them were donated.
mm.
Also, there was something like 50,000 people contributed physical labor to building Ginkgo.
But
So
this was
it's
also
really
part
kind
of
of
the
a
19
national project.
sure, and which was the national project being not only the Meiji Gaien development, but also the 1964 Olympics, and a lot of those facilities
Oh,
that are
wait,
being
but
used
this is
today
before this.
are legacy
Well,
facilities, aren't they?
no, this is before the Olympics. When people were contributing labor to build it, it was in the 20s when they were originally building the thing. So
Okay,
a
but
lot
the
of people
facilities that are
feel,
there
yeah,
today are still mostly. I mean, again, that was the
mhm,
Olympics like village
right,
and everything
hmm,
from
right,
1964, right? And it's
right.
wonderful.
Mhm.
But and I do
Well,
get, and again,
well,
I get
Jingu
that.
Gaien is older. Jingu Stadium is older. So Jingu Stadium
Yeah.
is built in the 20s. It's
Mm,
similar to Fenway Park or Wrigley Field in the US, or to
mm,
Koshien,
yeah.
similar age to Koshien. The second baseball stadium is newer, closer to the Olympics. The Rugby Stadium was from right immediate post-war. It was one of the first things that was
Mm,
built post-war. The other facilities are more like kind of like 60s
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, but take Swallow Stadium for example, and take the Japan Rugby Football Union run, Shibunomiya Rugby Football Field. If the Japan Rugby Football Union wants to redevelop the field, even in a way that some rugby fans disagree with the union's decision on artificial turf and a roof, and even if Swallows fans love the Wrigley Field 1920s building, in the end of the day, the Swallows are allowed to upgrade their stadium if they want to, aren't they?
Actually, it's not the Swallows' decision. It's Meiji Jingu because
Okay.
the Swallows rent the facility from Meiji Jingu, and yeah, they are legally allowed, but again, it's a moral issue.
Yeah.
And
Are
then
they
there's also
poisoning?
again with the Meiji I'm sorry, with the Jingu Stadium,
Yeah.
there's also a real, you're not into historical preservation, but some people are.
Yeah.
And when in Jingu Gaien, there's the Meiji Picture Gallery
Mm.
it's sort of at the far end of where the trees are. That's a historical landmark.
Are they
Well, the
knocking that
Jingu
down?
Stadium was just what? No, 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 they're not knocking it down. Let me
Okay.
finish.
Sorry.
That the but that of that part of the park is not included in the redevelopment plan. It'll
Yeah.
be completely overwhelmed by these other buildings, and I'll show you pictures in a minute, but
Yes.
it'll still stay there.
Yeah.
But the thing is that's a treasured landmark that has landmark designation. The Jingu Stadium was designed by the same architect and built at the same time.
Mm.
So why is the picture gallery something that should be kept, whereas the Jingu Stadium doesn't have that designation? It's not consistent. And if you
By the
look
way,
at, I'm from Chicago with Wrigley Field, and Wrigley Field is one of the jewels of Chicago. That it is possible to restore an older stadium and have it be wonderful. They
yeah.
just restored Koshien a few years ago,
Mm.
and beautifully. So you don't have to knock down an old stadium.
I was about to flip and completely side with you if they were knocking down the art building. So I'm kind of glad they're not doing that. Obviously, they realize
Okay.
that would be beyond the pale for all of the
That's
redevelopment.
what would be probably beyond the pale, yes.
Yeah. But look, and also, but at the same time, I mean, a sports stadium, by contrast, is something that's heavily used, right? And is probably, and look, it was actually one of the proposals for the Olympics was that they didn't need to knock down the Kokuito Kyogijo and rebuild
Oh,
it.
they didn't.
It
I
could
don't
already
think they
fit
should
100,000
have.
people, and that was actually the
Mhm.
whole original proposal, was that we do an eco Olympics by reusing the 64 facilities. But
Right.
they wanted to give construction contracts away to the construction companies and let them have a piece of the pie, and they
Right, right.
rebuilt the
And
same
that's what's
stadium.
driving this one too. That's what's driving this one as well. I mean, they
Okay.
don't need to rebuild these stadiums. They could renovate them, but that hasn't even been considered. I literally asked that at a meeting with government representatives this spring that was related to the rugby stadium. And I
Mm.
asked them, I said, have you done any kind of analysis of the feasibility and the cost benefits of renovating versus rebuilding? And
Mm.
the answer was no. They hadn't even considered it
So they wanted a new stadium, though. I mean,
because they want to have money making opportunities for the construction companies.
yeah. Well, but
And
again, if
that's how the
they're
Japanese
free to do
government
that.
runs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your concern is the public aspect, I assume, more than the private. I think if it's the
Mhm,
private aspect, honestly, companies can make dumb decisions, all that they like, and that's capitalism.
mhm.
But the fact it's the more the public aspect of this that the government's putting money in, and that they've sort of had to greenlight the zoning for this. That's your big
Exactly.
problem, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So look, walk me through. So you've got slides and so on. Walk me through the
Okay,
outrageous
sure.
zoning.
Okay, so I think you need to show them
Oh,
first.
I will do that. Here we go.
Okay, so when we were talking before, you're like, well, Jingu Gaien looks like a mess, and you mentioned earlier that that buildings don't get taken care of, and that's sort of a big pet peeve of mine in Japan. Is I see, I go to buildings that my customers have built and they're beautiful, but then like it's like once it's 10 years old, like the paint's starting to peel and whatever, or like things are scuffed, they don't like repaint periodically. It's like they make it once, it's beautiful, and then it just like gets worse and worse and worse, and then we're going to tear it down and rebuild it, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like the same thing is happening with Jinkugain, and I see it with a lot of other public facilities in Japan. They're
Hmm.
not maintained. It's not maintained well, and
It's
then
not the
that
type though.
feeds into, oh, it looks old and awful. We should just trash it. So it's a really bad vicious circle that happens. So
Hmm.
I just was first going to agree with you that yeah, when you go to Jinkugayan now, look, these stone structures that are at the entrance to the Ginkgo Avenue.
Yeah.
The other day I did a webinar with a Japanese landscape architect expert and was talking about how these are so historically significant or whatever, that they're very important in the it's sort of the history of landscape architecture in
Mm.
Japan. And so these important structures, Meiji Jingu is letting dandelions grow on them. I mean, look at
Yeah.
how terrible that looks. I mean, here you go, this close up of the dandelions on top. They're not taking care
You
of
know,
it.
as someone who walked through here every day, I would see the groundskeeper, like one old man looking after this, and I do feel immediately like, oh, I appreciate that person a lot, and he did a good job with what he had. But you're right, it's just there's no resources allocated towards. You get
No,
a place like Vancouver or a city like Vancouver or Britain or cities in Australia that really put like tax money into looking after parks and gardens and stuff like that,
right.
and how spectacular they are. Yeah, Japan doesn't do that anywhere, and it doesn't. But yeah, they also touched on a point there as well. That it's not even the culture to look after people's own houses, right? Every house goes up on the assumption it's going to be torn down and rebuilt after 20 years, and so,
Right.
landlords don't invest in maintenance or looking after it. It's just part of the overall
No.
mindset, isn't it?
Right, right. There's not a culture of maintenance. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. And so that's it's. I think that and it definitely affects parks.
yeah,
And so in Ginkgo Avenue, I just snapped this picture of, they have this little keep out sign. It's supposed to be marking off an area. It's like smashed into the ground. It's just awful looking. And another thing that bothers me aesthetically is all the signage in the park is obviously from 1964 and it
yeah.
is dated. Some of them are really terrible. I mean, this is the main sign, and it's just so ugly. And some of the ones in the park, I mean, they're just cringeworthy. So
So you're
there's a
okay.
lot of things could be done to spiff it up. So I'm
Yeah.
completely agree
You're,
with you on that, right?
you're okay with tearing down that particular sign?
Yeah, I know it's hideous, right? Oh, come on. Well, they're very Showa-ish, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Showa.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so I was going to agree with you because you said, "Oh, it doesn't really look so great." I'm like, "Yeah, they're not taking care of it."
Yeah.
Well, I do have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But let me talk a little bit about kind of what's happening and what's the issue and why
Yeah.
I've kind of gotten into this. And so, obviously, here's a picture of the Ginkgo avenues that are beautiful, landscape conservation area. Ginkgo Avenue itself is famous. So many Japanese TV shows or stories or movies use this as a location. It's a very sentimental place for people.
Yeah.
Um, this is an overview aerial shot of Ginkgo Gaien, and the area that is going to be redeveloped under this plan is what's in color on this. And
Mm.
so, there's the baseball stadium, there's the rugby stadium, there's all those other sports facilities, there's the cafes, there's lots of trees all over in various places.
Yeah.
And sort of it's a very unique, historical place. And I think my argument against what you were saying about, oh, well, just tear everything down and build it up new and create new opportunities. And yes, on one hand, that's part of Tokyo's culture, but on the other hand, having a history as a city without history and obliterating all bits of history makes what people in urban planning call a place where there's no place. Because one thing that's happened in Tokyo a lot is that a lot of the new things that go up don't have a lot of distinctness or personality. Now, in the case of Omotesando Hills, I don't really like it at all, but at
Mm.
least it has some sort of personality to it. But I
Mm.
think a good example would be the Harajuku station. That the new station, it's just kind of simple, clean lines, but it's kind of boring.
But that's
And there's
kind
a
of
lot
what
of stuff
Japanese
that goes
architecture style is. I mean, architects in
right.
Japan are famous for being minimalist and simplest like that when you let them do it.
Mhm.
And yeah, it kind of is what in a way, it's something that Japanese architects would actually appreciate, even though I know what you mean. It doesn't
Yep.
look like a ski chalet anymore, but
Well, but what it is you lose a sense of place.
sure.
And the thing is, it is possible to have modern architecture and development that has a sense of place. And I think a great example with that would be the way that the Nihonbashi area has been redeveloped. That those
Uh,
are new, beautiful buildings, but you feel like you're in Japan. You feel like you're in Nihonbashi. They kept a sense of place. So it
Ma
is
Ma
possible to do it.
Marunouchi has, I think, done that. They preserved the facades of
Yeah.
buildings when they put up the
Yeah. Mhm.
skyscrapers.
That
I
that would be another example. Yeah, that worked pretty well, I think, too.
What they're proposing to do with Nihonbashi is great. I haven't been to Nihonbashi lately, but at last I saw, it still has that horrible highway that they're going to get rid of.
Right,
Actually,
they're
that
gonna get
destroyed
rid of that, right.
Nihonbashi.
Yeah, I was talking about the area that's already been developed is just north of there.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So,
I
anyways,
need
go
to go
check
back
it
there.
out. It's actually quite nice. And when they get
I
rid of
didn't
the
think that
bridge
was a good
over
example,
Nihonbashi,
but
it'll
yeah.
be better. But I was
Okay,
thinking, no,
Hiroshima.
I meant not the bridge itself, but the development immediately above, but
Yeah.
north to of it, where
Okay.
Mitsukoshi is, and north of there.
Yeah.
Um, anyways, well, the thing about
Mm,
the thing about Jingu Gaien is that
yeah.
it's this large space in the center of the city,
Mm,
and so it's become a redevelopment target. And
sure.
that's actually not just Jingu Gaien. I've discovered that this is an issue with parks all over Japan, and I can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But um, it's sort of, oh, this is a great, easy place to put lots of buildings because there aren't buildings there now.
Mm,
And so a lot of people are saying that the Olympics were just an excuse to make it possible to develop Jingugayan. Because what happened is there was a blanket height restriction over all of Jingugayan.
mm,
And when they built the new national stadium for the Olympics, they had to lift that because the new stadium was going to be higher than that. So what they did is they just happened to coincidentally remove the height restrictions over all of Jingugayan and make them super high.
makes
Just
sense though.
by accident
But
at
that
that
makes
same
sense.
time.
That makes sense because in 1964, the earthquake standards didn't allow tall structures to be built. So probably these things are actually probably still. I don't know what earthquake reinforcing they've done, but now you can build safely taller buildings, right? So it kind of makes
No, no,
sense.
but the restrictions were not about the safety. The
Yeah,
reason that there were height restrictions in Jingugayan is because it's a landscape preservation area.
I see.
And so to keep the character of the area, they had these strict height restrictions.
Mm,
And
okay.
so they took them away at the same with the under the cover of the Olympics with the excuse of the Olympics.
Yeah.
So it was clearly, sort of, oh, let's make it possible developments in this area. And so have been coming out recently discussions of, former Prime Minister Mori,
Mm,
and Shintaro Ishihara and various people in the government, when it was, of course, Dentsu was involved in this plan too, because
of
of
course.
course they have to be part of it. Of, oh, we're gonna develop Jingugai and it's gonna be great. And at one
Well,
point, they showed the plans to Mori, and he's like, "Oh, this looks great. I have to live at least another 15 years. I can see them finish it."
yeah.
So,
If it was
yeah,
after Ishihara, the whole thing would be a casino resort, and Mori to me is living proof that only the good die young. The fact that he still is hanging on, he'll outlive all of us.
so yeah, here they are, pictures.
Yeah.
So it was their brainchild.
Well,
So that
I
in
mean,
itself makes it suspect, right?
look, that photo, Taro Aso Mori, I realize would be triggering to a lot of the types of people that are typically activists in the field of of doing good things. uh, I appreciate that, but look, Ishihara banned diesel trucks from Tokyo and actually did a lot to actually clean up. Like he actually under his tenure did some good things as well in terms of and
Mhm.
actually oversaw the whole Marunouchi renewal and so on and cleaned up the water. I mean, he actually, and these were things that he kept getting reelected for in spite of being a horrible, racist, and terrible person. Um, so, these are yes, the photo is. I'm not the sort of person who's triggered by that photo, although I know immediately I do cringe when I see Mori in particular. But that doesn't discredit inherently the project for me.
Okay. Well, okay, that's fine. Um, we'll come back to these guys a little bit later, okay?
Please.
So let me keep going. So there's right now the way this works, it's a public-private sort of
Mm,
collaboration, and Meiji Jingu, Mitsui Fudosan, Itochu,
mm,
and the Japan Sports Council are the four organizations that are involved in doing this. And what I've done, this is the same picture I showed you a minute ago.
mm,
I have marked on here the trees that are going away. I've sort of taken away with hash marks. There's some that are kind of like behind the Ginkgo Avenue that you can't see that are going away too. And then
Mm.
all the private sports, I'm sorry, the public sports facilities that are going away have access on them.
Yeah,
You can see there's a lot of red.
sure.
So, nearly 1,000 trees, many of them 100 years old, baseball and rugby stadium, golf driving range, all those the sports facilities, cafes.
Okay.
So this may be a little bit hard to see, but um, the left-hand side is Ginkgo Gaien currently,
Mhm.
and the part that's colored in is, the part that's the redevelopment area. So all the green, dark green is where trees are.
Mm.
The one in the middle is what the plan is. And so you can see right away that there's a lot less dark green
Yeah.
because they're going to taking away trees. Um, there's also concerns that the Ginkgo Avenue, they're making a big deal about we're leaving the Ginkgo Avenue alone, but actually it's probably going to die too because of where they're putting the baseball stadium. I'll show you more in a minute. So if you
Yeah.
look on the right hand side, all the red dots are trees that are going to be either cut down or moved. So you can see that there's some in concentrated areas, but then there's also lots of like little ones scattered around as well.
Sorry, I don't mean to nitpick, but with apologies, presumably the intent of moving trees is not killing them. It's kind of it's an assumption that that's likely to happen, that a lot of the people opposed to the project are doing. But the intention is surely to sort of, I mean, I'm curious what this looks like, assuming that the relocation works, even if we
Okay.
think it's not.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit more about relocating trees in a minute. It's
Okay.
it's not very easy. The other problem with this is that they have not specified where the trees are going to be moved
Well,
to.
that's what I want to know. That,
No,
because
they
it's not
have
going to be
not
that they're all
made
going to
they have not
disappear.
told us at all where they're going to go. That is not
Okay.
because there's not really room for them in the plan as it stands. And some of the trees that planning to move, and I'll show a couple pictures, they're
Mm.
huge. There's the two Ginkgo Avenues
Oh yeah.
that are,
Mm.
I mean, the 4 rows of ginkgos that are parallel to them. There are 19 ginkgos that we're planting at the same time that go perpendicular. They're
Right.
the ones that are along the way to the entrance to the rugby stadium. So
Yeah.
those are huge, ginkgo trees. They're like, oh, we're going to move them. I'm like, how could you move a tree that's like what 5 stories tall or whatever that
Yeah.
they are?
They're
I mean,
enormous.
it's not really practical, as according to tree experts that I've been talking to.
Okay.
So here's a couple of the other trees. You can see how huge they are. Look at the small people sitting on those bench compared to these trees. And I don't even have all the trees in the picture here.
Mm.
Um, we also have as guidance for the success of tree planting what happened in um, with the new national stadium. So
Mm.
they made a big deal with the new national stadium that they were going to transplant trees that were in the way of when they, because it was a larger footprint
Mm.
than what the old one was. And according to tree experts, there are only 3 of the trees that were transplanted that actually are in good shape,
Mm.
and the rest are in terrible shape. And you can see it when you walk over there that the trees that are there, they're like their leaves are all yellow, whereas the ones across the street that haven't been moved are all green. They're obviously sickly. This was one left I took earlier this year.
Yeah.
One of the trees they transplanted, and they put it next to this pretty important monument that's there. And
Mm.
it is obviously dead. And later this year it was cut down. And so that's a more recent picture on the right.
Lysander
So they didn't
45.
really do a good job with it,
Yeah.
with the national stadium.
Yeah. Lysander 45 points out it's very easy for moved trees to go into root shock, and most gardeners assigned to work in public parks have no experience dealing with that kind of issue.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
A very good point. Yes,
Yeah.
very good point. Um, see,
But it's also
sorry.
kind of
So
strange to me. They're going to move them, but they haven't disclosed where they're going to move them to. That seems kind of important as well. I was
yeah,
presuming that the intention is for the park to remain as green, at least as it was if
mm-mm,
reconfigured,
no,
but they're not
it's
clear on
not
that.
going to be. It's not going to be. And actually, that was one of the annoying things of this whole project has been
Yeah.
the incredible sort of dishonest statements from the developers in Koike. And
Mm.
so they had started off saying, there's going to be more green in this new plan.
Right.
Well, when you actually go and analyze it, if you look at square footage, there's more green. However, if you look at actual volume of green, there's much less because they counted, let's say, a square meter that has a giant 100-year-old tree on it,
Mm,
the same as a square meter that has grass.
mm,
And so they're like, "Oh yeah, we're increasing the where there's green because they're having more like grass." And then they're doing things like, you know, the roof. They're putting some green on the roof, and they're saying that that's greenery. They're kind of like a lot of tricky stuff with numbers. But yeah, a couple major publications called them out on the like, yeah, the green is not increasing.
By the way,
Particularly Toyo Keizai was all over them with that.
you just reminded me, Koike actually used to be environment minister, I think, as well, right? When she was in
I
cabinet.
know, which is what particularly ridiculous. I mean, well, the thing is that this whole plan
Mm,
has so many problems, and the people of Tokyo have shown how against they are, but she sticks to it, which makes me think, what is in it for her? She wants to have the legacy of being the governor of Tokyo who ruined Ginkgo Gaien that everyone loves, and when they put in the baseball stadium and it ruins the roots of the ginkgo trees, and the Ginkgo Avenue withers in 10 years, and everyone blames her. Like, does she want that to be her legacy? Like, she seems smarter to me than that. So I just don't know what is motivating her.
mm,
It's because it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
mm.
Um, so anyways, I'll continue my little tour here.
Please, yeah.
This historic Jingu Stadium.
Mm.
A recent poll of Japanese baseball fans had it as their second favorite in the country.
What was the
Number one was
first?
Yokohama Stadium.
Oh, Yokohama. Okay, which is newer.
Yeah.
I was wondering if it was Tokyo Dome, which would be very much
No,
like the
Tokyo
new rugby.
Dome, I don't even think it made the list. I mean, I'm
Okay.
not a big baseball person myself, but baseball fans say it's horrible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. I see again. I like new futuristic stuff. So yeah, but
Yeah.
that's me.
Well, a lot of baseball fans love these old stadiums. And as I said, I'm from Chicago where Wrigley Field is a huge tourist draw.
I can understand loving this, but it's also, being in a crappy old stadium when you have to use the bathroom or you want to like buy stuff as well can they can
Well,
show their age.
right. But that's where, again, I think that Wrigley is such a good model
Mm,
that they have taken the historic Wrigley Stadium, but they've put in all the concessions, all the bathrooms. Actually, someone was asking me, well, what about wheelchairs? And I did some research on that and found a sports wheelchair blogger who goes around to different stadiums and writes about how wheelchair friendly they are. And he said that Wrigley was one of the best.
yeah,
So they were able to renovate it so that it was really top notch from a wheelchair user's perspective. So
yeah,
there's a lot of things that you can do with an old stadium like this. And
sure.
now we're talking, and this is another thing I didn't mention. We talked about the environment in terms of trees,
Mm,
but there's also an issue with tearing down existing structures and building new ones
mm,
is very, very wasteful from an environmental point of view. And I had a thing I tweeted a while ago. It was a professor in the US who's kind of an environmental expert and said one of the most sort of environmentally friendly things you can do is renovate existing buildings rather than tear them down and build new ones. So if we're thinking about impact on the environment, that's something to consider too.
mhm. But in the bigger picture, that's what Japan does with everything. I mean,
Yeah, but is that a good does that make sense to keep doing that anymore given what's happening with the environment? And we also, does that make sense, right? So, yes, Japan has always done that, but should it
mm,
keep doing that?
sure,
The
sure.
word that the Japanese activists I hear like to use is they say, "Oh, we're stuck in the scrap and build mold."
Mm,
And
which we
that was what
absolutely are.
Japan. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so the question is with all the
But,
talk you hear in Japan about carbon neutral and zero emissions, and we're going to be ESG, and we're going to follow the SDGs. If you keep tearing down everything and rebuilding it really often, then it's not consistent with any of those things.
Yeah. And there's a bigger
And
macro discussion. The macro discussion, I don't think is enough for a veto of a specific project, although it is worth the fact they didn't even consider it is worth raising. That they should have consulted and thought more about those sort of things as factors. I completely agree. The problem with trying to preserve a lot of old buildings in Japan, is that they're built cheap because they expect them to tear them down. They don't put an insulation.
right,
Like they're
right,
not.
yeah,
You have to tear them down to make them worth preserving in the first place, right?
right. I know. Yeah, that is a problem. That is a
But that's
problem.
not the case here. That's
That's
a
not
bigger
the case.
discussion.
That's not the case here. But you're right. I think it is an issue in general, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's some arguments for maybe how Japan has to think in general about buildings in the new era now that we need to be more environmental friendly.
Yeah.
I'm lost my cursor. Where did my cursor go? Oh, here it is. Sorry. I
No
couldn't see
problem.
it. So these are just some pictures of, Koshien and Wrigley and Fenway. There's similar baseball stadiums that have been renovated and people love. So it's not like it's impossible.
Yeah.
Um, and particularly Jingu Stadium, it's really, the architecture, it's all preserved
It's
for how
nice.
it originally was. So there is an architectural value of it, talking to architecture people.
Yeah.
Then the rugby stadium, and again, as you said, Japanese rugby fans, it's sacred ground for them. They like being close to the action. They like
The thing
in
that I
the
like most about
in every weather.
Shibunomiya is that there's no running track around this ground, which most sports stadiums in Japan have. And because there's
Right.
no running track, you can be right up against them and see the games very well. That's the biggest thing. The ground is not
Hmm.
looked after as well as it should be,
Right.
but it is grass.
Hmm.
But it's a small stadium. It's and again, they should be adding seating. Even a roof would be okay. But yeah, I get how purists would be against artificial turf, but
Hmm.
it's actually getting quite good. I've played on all three, dirt, turf, and grass, and I'm not against turf, although it's
Hmm.
not a good look on international matches. But I get that.
Hmm.
But that's a
Hmm.
decision I think the Japan Rugby Football Union can make, presuming that they're the ones making the decision on the
The
ground.
thing is, evidently, that they sort of weren't really the ones making the decision. There was an article about this. I
Mhm.
think it was I think it was the Asahi who had an article when the announcement about what form the new stadium was going to take came out in August. There was I'm pretty sure it was the Asahi, a very in-depth article
Mm.
where they found that basically rugby the rugby organization was told, if you want to have a rugby stadium in the middle of the
Ah,
city, then you're just going to have to give up
right,
anything that you would want, so that you can go along with our plan that's basically building
right.
a music venue that kind of has a rugby stadium in it. So they
Which is
kind of
kind of Tokyo
twisted their
Dome.
arm.
Got it.
It's what?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, just the wheels turning in my head. That makes sense for the perspective. If they want to have music concerts on the ground, you can't do that easily on grass and so on. New
Right. No, no, no,
Zealand
no.
cancelled a Michael Jackson concert. Michael Jackson was going to come to New Zealand for the only time ever, and it was going to be the biggest concert in New Zealand history. And it was cancelled because the rugby ground owners refused to put chairs on the grass on the rugby pitch.
Mm,
But that's probably, and that's what Tokyo Dome does, right? As well, they have concerts when they're not having baseball games. So it sounds like they
right.
wanted to do a kind of a Tokyo Dome type deal.
Right. Well, then I guess sort of my question is, if you want to have concerts, why can't you have concerts in the new national stadium, which is practically unused currently? Why do you need to build a new thing? And I guess the MBA in me on all these things, and also the Tokyo taxpayer in me, is like, or national taxpayer, because actually for the rugby stadium, it's the national government. But the taxpayer in me and the MBA in me wants to see some sort of financial analysis.
Yeah.
Does Japan even, Tokyo need a new music venue? What kind of actual projections are any of these things based on? Also, with the new high-rise buildings, office buildings, there's going to be what's called the 2023 cliff in
Mhm.
Tokyo real estate. Have you heard about that?
This is where there's gonna be an oversupply of buildings, and they won't be able to fill them, right? Based on
Right. Yeah.
planning back
Because
in 2000. Yeah.
Exactly, yes, for all these, things that are redevelopments that are coming online, including, the big building in Yaisu, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many things are coming online in the next year
Yeah.
that, office real estate prices are expected to collapse. Actually, the market is already in oversupply as of right now.
There
So
was
in
one
that
like in
environment, why
2010.
would you be
Yeah.
planning more buildings?
Well, you have to keep your construction company donor friends in business, I suppose.
Well, that it seems to be what's going on.
Yeah.
The thing doesn't make sense otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So you've got this whole beautiful area, and it's kind of open because it's been this landscape preserved area. It doesn't have high rises. It's under large sky. It's sort of an unusual place in the city.
Mm,
There's the softball fields, again, a rarity
mm,
in Tokyo, and so where these softball fields are is where they're going to put the expensive private tennis club, because of course those are the friends of
mm.
the people in power and need to be taken care of.
Speaking of which, there's a question for you from Dan H asking, do we know of any
Uh-huh.
politicians that have any financial interest or to any of the donors with this redeployment plan?
That is a good question. So I was going to talk about it later, but I will talk about it now.
Mm.
So one thing that I am hoping for, and if I can pronounce this right because I'm always doing it wrong, it's the Deus ex machina. Did I say
Yeah.
that right?
Deus ex machina. Yeah.
Okay, ex machina. So in other words, there's a possibility that this whole thing could be scuttled. I hate even talking about it because I don't want to jinx it. But what is happening right now is that there is a big push
Mm.
by the prosecutors in Japan going after bribery related to the
Oh,
Olympics.
right,
And there
right.
have been bunch of people thrown in jail, right? Not thrown in jail. I mean, put in detention for questioning, right?
Yeah.
Including this one guy
Including Maury.
Takahashi who keeps getting
Oh, yeah.
um, and they've been questioning Mori too.
Yeah.
And so the scuttlebutt in like the weekly kind of tabloidy kind of magazines and sort of fringe YouTubers, whatever, but people who probably are hearing stuff
Mm,
is that they call it the honmaru.
mm,
Like the real thing is they think that there was corruption in the planning of this redevelopment.
mm,
And again, the whole idea of doing the Olympics is kind of an excuse to make it possible to redevelop this area. Potential deals with Mitsui Fudosan or other developers, etc. That there's a lot of suspicions that there has been some hanky panky. And again, given the way that Koike is acting, like the only rational explanation I could find is that she's getting a lot of money from someone. That's just my take on it. So,
well,
anyways, so to answer the question, nothing has been uncovered, but a lot has been rumored. It kind of smells that way,
mm.
and
Even if Koike
people
herself is
are
not
expecting
directly,
there will be revelations coming
yeah,
forward.
even if Koike is not directly corrupt from this, obviously the groups involved in lobbying for this are themselves numerous and pretty powerful. And I'd say I'm not. I would not presume direct corruption necessarily. I'd be surprised if it went all the way to Koike per se. I'm sure she's been heavily influenced, but I would not be surprised at all if favors were being done around the real estate and the construction aspects to grease the wheels on this, as is clear happened with already is coming out now with other aspects of the Olympics.
Right, right. Yes. And so people, again, there's lots of rumors that, Maury was just really, really set on this idea. And it was like an obsession of
See,
his,
that's kind
evidently.
of credible. That's the thing. He's such a terrible person. He would support bad ideas. I mean, he's made his whole career. He's just
Exactly,
succeeded on
exactly. It is.
supporting
It's
bad ideas.
completely in character with him, right? Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So, anyways, where I'm watching carefully this aspect, but enough people are talking about it that makes me think that there's probably something there that we'll find out in the next few months.
Right.
So, waiting for the Deus ex machina to come in to save
Yeah.
us. but we're still pushing anyways in the meantime.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are the cafes next to Ginkgo Avenues, and it just bugs me. This whole plan. They use this word in Japanese, machi zukuri. We're
Mm.
gonna create a town, urban planning, it makes it sound like there's nothing there to begin with. It's like, no, you're going to destroy the machi that you've already got for this. And actually, right here where the cafes are will be the wall of the new baseball stadium, because they have to push it over to over here to make room for the high rise buildings, because the whole thing is prioritized around making the high rises.
I presume there will be
So
cafes in the high-rise buildings, though. I mean, these are
yeah,
lovely.
but it's not going to be the same.
Sure.
So here's a little GIF showing where they're going to put the I don't know if it's going to work. I think it's oh shoot, I think it's not going to work on this platform. I had a GIF where you could see where
Oh,
where
animate.
they're going to go up, and like these
Oh,
these giant things go in and like
maybe it'll
tear
show
down
on the
all the
next.
trees.
Yeah, maybe it'll show on the next slide or something. Oh,
If I
I want
said
to see that.
no, it doesn't work. The GIF
Okay.
doesn't work in this platform, unfortunately.
Ah,
Shoot. Yeah,
is
I
what it
don't
is.
think. No, I can't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, so you can look. I'll repost it on my Twitter, and you can look at it. It's a really great GIF that just shows these huge proportion things
Yeah.
just like plunked down there. One other thing that made people really upset is, with the commercial, there's going to be like a commercial facility linking the two high rises, and here's
Yeah.
what it looks like: an outlet shopping mall.
On Monte Sando Hills.
Gosh, like, do we need more
Well,
stuff like this? No. So, um,
well, yeah.
and then this is the whole problem with the Ginkgo Avenue and the baseball stadium. So you can see the baseball stadium is sited right
Mm,
next to the trees, only 8 meters.
right.
And tree experts have found, based on the experience when they put a tunnel underneath um, Shinjuku Gyoen, that if you have any digging of the roots less than 15 meters away from the ginkgos, it'll kill them. In this
Mm,
case, it's going to be 8 meters. Also, they're going to have the tall sort of what fence
mm,
type structures. It's going to kind of just hurt the whole look of the whole area. And
mm,
again, take away those cafes and take away kind of this charming spot.
yeah.
This is Professor Ishikawa, and so she's the one who did the original analysis
Mm,
of it's going to be 1,000 trees that get killed or removed, and
mm,
she's put forward through the she runs the or is one of the people who runs the UNESCO Committee on Sites and Landmarks, and so their Japan branch put together an alternative plan. There was also another group of architects who put together an alternative plan. So there are alternative ideas to rejuvenate or redevelop um,
mm.
Ginkgo Gaien that don't require cutting down 1,000 trees. So the thing is that the approach that the city is taking is not the only possible way to do it, that there have been credible alternatives that have been put forward
Mm,
that the Koike has dismissed out of hand.
mm,
And so again, early on, like, I think maybe she thought no one was going to notice or really care about it, because she approved it in early March after it was pushed through the
mm.
Development Planning Council. And even though there's been this huge backlash, as I said, 69.5% of Tokyo voters polled were against it, and that was the end of June.
Mm.
And the more people find out about it, the more people are upset. I'm at 105,000 people on my petition right now. So that's a lot of people for a
That's a lot of
petition.
people. Those are
Yeah.
similar stats to Tokyo taxpayers that are opposed to the Olympics, if I recall, as well.
Yeah.
Which also, and probably similar stats to opposed to the Abe funeral.
Possibly.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been learning a lot about how planning processes work in Japan, and I
Mm,
was really shocked to find out that in Japan, environmental assessment happens after the project is approved, not
mm,
before.
Mm,
So basically, it tends to be kind of rubber stampy.
mm,
Um, However, in this case, and also the other problem is like listening to the deliberations of the environmental assessors on this project,
mm,
they were really grappling with all the issues that should have been grappled with by the planning council, but they ignored. Like, is this really in the public interest, and does it make sense, and blah blah blah.
mm.
um, so they actually ended up doing something unusual. They wrapped up their work in August.
Yeah.
Clearly they were under a lot of pressure from like either developers or the city or both, but they put in some stipulations that developers have to report back,
Mm,
like things like your question of, well, where are those trees going to be transplanted to and how are they
mm,
going to do it. That under normal circumstances the developer could just do whatever they wanted, but they're like, no, you guys have to come back to us and discuss more.
yeah.
So they gave a green light, but not completely, which was in the world of Japanese environmental assessments, epic making.
Mm,
So that's
mm,
a good thing. That's another reason I should mention that I'm kind of all hyped up about this project is it's large and it's prominent. And I'll talk in a minute, but this let's develop parks because they're convenient places to put buildings to make money is happening all over Japan. It's
mm,
like an epidemic. So what happens with Ginkgo Gaien is really important precedent setting. And
mm,
so there's already been a precedent set with the environmental assessment, but if we can get this plan stopped or revised, it will give some hope to people in all the locations that are fighting against, some of these plans are just crazy,
mm,
things that are being planned. And it's because again, it's the rapacious construction state. um, and does that make sense for Japan to be working that anyway anymore?
mm.
So um, so what are we doing? We're um, contacting lot of, politicians, lobbying. There's some of the Japanese activists I'm working with. There's lots of formal administrative procedures you can do, trying to create visibility through press outreach, social media. We do different study sessions, study walks in the park. Our next study walk in the park is going to be on the 10th.
Mm,
So that's a week from Monday. So I'll send out something about that. But that an opportunity to kind of learn more.
yeah.
But it's been hard to get attention because the city and the developers have been putting pressure on the media not to report about this,
Mm,
particularly on TV, not to report about it.
yeah.
Um, so I have been told by several people in the know that the more attention from overseas we can get will help. The typical
Go
gaiatsu thing.
Gaiatsu.
Yeah, I've been told to
Very
get
1980s.
Gaiatsu. I'm like, okay, I'm trying. So,
Yeah.
so that's what we're up to. So we have, if anyone hasn't signed our petition, this is um, a QR code that will take you there.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're working on that. But I wanted to just mention, if you'll let me, just about that this is happening all over Japan.
Mm,
And it's really quite alarming. And once I got involved in this, people started to reach out to me who are fighting these types of projects and others. And so I'll give you just a few examples of ones that are happening right now. So Kamiseya in Yokohama. So the last picture was from there, and this is another picture. It was actually a U.S. military base that was given to the Japanese government, and so it's got huge, amount, just open, unspoiled, beautiful land,
mm,
and they want to have a flower exposition. So like the Olympics or Expo type thing, but this one's for flowers. So they're going to destroy this natural area to make a horticultural exhibit. So could you be more ironic? And then after that, they're going to make a theme park. And they want to have almost as many visitors as Disneyland. And again, from an MBA perspective, their projections on all these things, totally make no sense. And it's an excuse to develop another area. And this is one of the
mm,
few kind of really open green spaces. And it's also in the um I forgot I'm not headwaters, but it's sort of the area that feeds into some rivers. It's sort of where the start of some water sort of ecosystems are, so it's valuable from ecosystem perspective, and
Mm.
there's lots of, animals and plants and trees and things there, and so that's one example.
Yeah.
Mitsuzawa Park in Yokohama, you can see there's a stadium already there. No,
Mm.
one stadium's not good enough. They need another stadium, so they're going to build one next to it and destroy public facilities and a whole hill with cherry trees on it.
Mm.
So that's another one. We've got Kyoto Prefectural Botanical Garden. They're going to be building a stadium that's just to the right of where this picture was taken. On the other side of the Botanical Garden, they're going to be tearing down huge amounts of trees and to put in cafes and restaurants, just so completely messing up the garden.
Kyoto is the poster child in Japan of ugly redevelopment in the
Yes,
wrong
and
places.
it would be, yeah, and then so like, oh, another one, right?
Yeah.
This is Oji Park in Kobe.
Mm.
And so for some reason, the mayor of Kobe has the idea of taking part of the park and inviting a university to build a branch campus there, and has not given any rational explanation as to why this is a good idea. And
Mm.
it's going to lead to a lot of the facilities that average people use in the park being destroyed. And
Mm.
and again, another stadium sort of where they put the university. There's a stadium there, but that would be torn down, and then they're going to move it someplace else and take away the tennis courts and the pool, and and all these trees. It's
Mm.
just ridiculous. Oh, and this wisteria tunnel that I took a picture of.
Yeah.
So Suzuka Shonen no Mori, another one. Doho Park and Scuba. This one is ridiculous. They want to put in the middle of a park a craft brewery and a glamping facility. And they showed me where they were going to put this, and it's just so out of place and out of character. And there's this idea among Japanese politicians now that
Yeah.
should be places that make money.
Mm.
And parks should be nigiwai, which means like all bustling and full of life and profit making activities. Like it's like they're forgetting what a park is for. It's for nature and for people to enjoy being outdoors. So
Mm.
it's really quite disturbing, all of this. And a couple examples of completed ones: Hiroshima Central Park. So this is some pictures when they're doing the construction. So they took half the park and they built a giant soccer stadium in it. So the whole area that was green and open lawn space and where people would have picnics and stuff is now a giant soccer stadium. So it takes away that kind of um, you know public space to put sports facilities.
Mm.
Is a park in Nagoya, and does that look like a park to you? It's got all these designer boutiques. Kind of looks like a shopping mall to me, but
Oh,
that's a real completed example.
it's Nagoya, but yes. Yeah. I didn't realize that they had a imitation Tokyo Tower there.
I know, isn't that it's pathetic? It's like it sort of looks like a mini Eiffel Tower. Anyways, it's like they made a park into a shopping mall, basically.
Yeah.
Stuff like this is planned all over, and so sort of why is this happening? This is my little analysis. Again, this is in Kamiseya,
Mm.
the um, um, the Sakura Avenue that they're going to tear down. So there's a bunch of reasons why this is happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so one is that large, wide open spaces are attractive to developers. So this is Kamiseya, but also like within cities, a park. That's really convenient. Nobody owns the parkland, it's other than the government, so you don't have to like buy up little things, or I'll do other things normally when you do a development. So it's like really attractive place to put something. And local governments are often really into the idea because they want some way to make money, and government officials are susceptible to bribes. And also, if you're a government official, rather than like do mundane things like fill in potholes or other things that make it better for people's everyday lives,
Mm.
like, oh, we made this project, or look, oh, we made this building. It's something you can point to.
Mm.
So its ego is part of it. There's this whole thing that is the whole let's build municipal buildings, and it's a very lucrative activity for Japanese construction firms. And so there's actually
Mm.
a word for this in Japanese, which is hakomono gyosei. So
Mm.
hakomono means big boxes, and
Mm.
gyosei is government. And so it's the Japanese governments love to make these public buildings and stadiums and things like that with funds. If
Yeah.
you read Dogs and Demons by Alex Kerr, he talks about this.
Yeah.
And we couldn't see the GIF before, but here, this is actually Ginkgo Gaien. So over there on the right, that's the picture
Oh, it's
gallery.
Coco's Fumes. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And so you can see over on the left in the back is the new National Stadium.
Yeah,
And you
the
can see
rugby.
how the soccer stadium on the left here is such this giant boxy, ugly, literally like a box,
Yeah.
right? Then we can see in front of the picture gallery, the box on the right is the indoor part of the tennis club, and then
Mm.
the pink parts are the outdoor tennis courts. So
Yeah.
look at that large amount of space that's being given to a private club, and most of the public can't use it. And
Mm.
just look at how these structures all dwarf that poor picture gallery.
Mm.
I mean, they're huge and hideous. I'm sorry, they really are.
Yeah.
So, but that's there. So it's a continuation of this bubble, this Showa era. Let's build
Mm.
all these public buildings, and without instead spending money on like people's.
Yeah.
There is also a big thing in the Japanese government that they're really into privatizing government services. And part of this is this idea of privatizing parks. So
Mm.
a lot of these park development projects are under this law called the Park PFI, Public Financing Initiatives, which basically the national government is encouraging local governments to privatize parks. And when you privatize parks, you have to have some money making incentive. Just having lawns and trees is not going to satisfy the private business that wants to make money. So then they have to put stuff there. So that's where you get the restaurants and the cafes and the stadiums and the
Mm.
glamping and the beer hall, or all these other things that why do you need to put them in the park? Because someone makes money that way. And there's also a specific policy of the sports agency to promote building stadiums.
Yeah.
So the new I'm sorry, the new rugby stadium is under that as well. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because I looked at the sports agency site, and they talk about like putting them in the center of the city, and of course like where there are parks is a good place. And I looked for any mention of what about environmental impact of building all these stadiums, and it was only listed as it might be a potential like um, what's the hurdle, or like get in the way of our plans, is people might talk about the environmental problems, like that's all they said about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There is a thing as well with sports stadiums going back a long way. The reason that all large sports stadia in Japan have running tracks around them, which make them horrible as like soccer or rugby stadiums, is that they also, in order to receive public funding and support for the stadiums, they have to be multi-use,
Hmm.
which I hope isn't the case with what they're doing in Meiji Gaien, because that was the only good thing about Shibunomiya, like as a stadium. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah, but no, but that's the problem, it's going to be multi-use.
it'll be multi-use for concerts. But I hope they don't put a running track around that puts you so far away
Yeah,
from the ground.
I don't think they're going to be right track, but I think there are issues with not being so close to the ground though.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not optimized for rugby, for sure.
That doesn't sound like it. Yeah.
No, no.
Mm.
Yeah. It's almost like the rugby's like an excuse to make a a music venue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another whole problem is the way that public planning works in Japan.
Yeah.
And so I show here, this was for the OG Koen people in Kobe. Like
Mm.
one of these little squares was the how they found out that their whole park was being redeveloped.
Hey, it's in a newspaper that's doing well. I know with a lot of government like consultations on new legislation that they literally just publish it on pages that are not indexed, and then they call up their friends or the people that they expect to have show up and rely on nobody showing up or finding out
Mm.
about it.
Yeah, this was in like this is like the little Kobe
A
city
little,
PR newspaper. Okay,
yeah,
you probably get one of those from the ward or city that you live in. Do
yeah.
you ever read that?
Well, it's terribly useful
Whoever
for
reads
wrapping up
that?
rubbish.
Well, exactly. Yes. No. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So, and
Yeah,
people aren't involved, and there's a Japanese society of people who are working age don't have time to be involved in their local area because they work all the time.
yeah,
And so then you get a lot of retired people who are involved in these things. But and and there's some working people, but it's hard to do these things. Any hearings or meetings or things that happen all happen on weekdays during the day.
yeah,
So I've been able to participate because I work for myself, so I can make time. But if you have a normal job, you can't participate in these public processes.
yeah, yeah,
So there's lack of knowledge about trees, and so again, this whole idea that you can just transplant trees easily is just not, it's not the case.
yeah.
Um, and there's also lack of appreciation for the value of trees. There's so much data about the effect that trees have for cooling the
Mm,
city and cleaning the air. There's also a lot of interesting data on mental health benefits of being near having near parks or having parks available to you. So it feels like there's not enough appreciation for trees in these
mm,
plans. It's often they're put in as like garnish around the sides of buildings, and
yeah.
just understanding the importance of parks. So there's a lot of these issues. Just the parks are threatened in Japan right now.
Mm, mm.
So, and then lastly, this is my, well, what can you do? Talk with people about it and get involved.
Yeah,
That's my little
yeah,
speech, but
yeah. No, very good. So I must admit, I was assuming it was more of a sort of a private redevelopment. I kind of thought, well, the stuff's all old anyway, and surely they can improve it or they can do what they want. But I definitely see what you're calling out, that this is actually generally more of a public redevelopment. Certainly, it's a partnership on that, and it's being done without transparency. And for me, the thing on the trees and how they're moving them, and the fact that that's not even been, like, considered and it's been sort of flagged in the environmental assessment is kind of that's very surprising. I mean, I presume if they say that they're moving them, that verb normally entails, a location of where that's going to and so
exactly.
on.
No,
Yeah,
the
and a plan
information
entails a plan.
disclosure from the developers has just been atrocious. And
Yeah,
and the environmental assessment or assessors kind of rake them over the coals about that.
yeah,
Really, I mean, just listening to the hearings,
mm,
really seemed like the developers thought that the environmental assessment would be a rubber stamp.
yeah,
And it was almost like they didn't take it seriously. And it was like they've been told, oh, you're a shoo-in and everything's fine and just go through the motions. And so they were just going through the motions.
yeah. Well, interesting. Well, it'll be very interesting to see if, as you suspect, that these current Olympic-related corruption allegations spread, and this seems like an area that's ripe for scrutiny on that anyway. Also enlightening to see how the process itself, um, as you pointed out, how it's kind of skimmed through this, where basically, yes, the builders, it sounds like are pretty much being able to do what they want without. Yeah, normally, I mean, even on private developments, you'd expect a certain amount of proper oversight as to how it's being done, and you're pointing out that's been skipped over here, and it looks like with this political support for skipping it over. So, I
Exactly,
that definitely makes
exactly.
sense.
Yeah. Right. And
Yeah.
even one thing I have, on my last bullet point on this page,
Mm.
I've been involved in the US in some, sort of protesting of development plans that involve tree cutting. So I have I have some experience of what it looks like on the other side of the ocean.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've discovered is that there are not regulations cutting down trees in Japan.
Mm.
So, for example, in at least in California, which is my U.S. location, they have rules that if you want to cut down trees on your private property, that you have to get permission from the government to do it. You have to get a permit, and
Yeah.
you have to have a reason to do it, and it could be denied. And there's a presumption that you're going to not chop down trees willy-nilly. There's no rules like that in Japan. If it's your property, anything goes with the trees on it. So then you have
Absolutely.
other problems like, the mega solar installations in rural areas in Japan, where they cut down all the trees on an entire mountain and then they put up solar panels, which
Mm.
is just insane. But there's nothing legally that's in place to prevent that.
Yeah, in New Zealand, the same case. You need permission, even if you want to do development on your land that affects the roots of a tree on a different property, if the tree is above a certain size. So you get a lot of obviously neighbor disputes around that, around somebody does something on their property that kills a neighbor's tree. A lot of lawsuits over that. And New Zealand now, there's a whole process that you need permission for that, and you need a planning approval. Of course, there's nothing like that in Japan, and yeah, I've never really thought very much about it. Japan has always been a very quick developed country, which I sort of like. But on the other hand, you could say that it's lacking features of a developed country in some ways, and not having those sort of mechanisms that we've learned, prevent these kinds of issues. They actually serve a public good.
Exactly. Exactly,
All right.
exactly. And when I think, again, there needs to be more recognition of trees as a public good. And particularly now when the environment is such an issue, and trees can have a big impact on cities and their heat index, etc.
Mm.
One of the professors who I had give a lecture had this incredible chart where he showed warming, and he had Paris and New York, getting hotter every year.
Yeah.
And then he had Tokyo with a much steeper. So
The heat
Tokyo's
island in
been
Tokyo
getting
is crazy.
hotter faster than some of these other comparison cities.
Yeah. No, that
And
was
part of it is
actually,
because trees are not being preserved.
yeah, yeah. I didn't say anything, but earlier on, from the time I was a policy consultant around this, the greenification thing, when they talked about how it'll have the same amount of green spaces before, even though it'll be grass instead of a tree. They did actually bring in a regulation recognizing to counter Japan's heat wave, Tokyo's heat island effect, where they actually realized that if we put grass on the roofs of buildings and stuff like that, it can stop some of the reflection that feeds back into the heat island. And so Tokyo, again, under Ishihara, actually passed a regulation mandating new buildings to have a certain amount of green space either on the roof or in the land around it. But you can do it by just laying down some grass, and that's what they're doing.
Mm,
So
mhm.
they were specifically triggered by that law, which obviously a tree is better than that. And it's also why the western half of central Tokyo is so much better than the eastern half of central Tokyo, which is old, and the roads are too narrow, and it's all concrete. Um, yeah, the trees make a huge difference to land values and livability and so on. So
Right, exactly.
yeah, final question. We're going to wrap up, but Danesh just dropped a question, so I'll make this the final one. Danesh asked, could you ask Rochelle if converted from to inner city? Could I ask Rochelle if converted to inner city farm would solve a lot of problems as well as help with Japan feeding itself? Have there been any plans of them being built in Tokyo? Do you know anything about inner city farm developments in Tokyo?
No, I have not heard of any of those, actually.
For what it's worth, 10H, I know, like in Kumamoto Maia, around universities and schools, there are little rice plots that are still kept, like that the students work on and stuff like that. But in terms of like actual urban farming, like in a serious way, like it is amazing in Japan. Less so now than like 30 years ago. But every spare plot of land, even in cities like Fukuoka, you would see serious like land being used for farm, like even like a property small enough for a house they would grow rice on. You don't really see that nowadays. I think that's got something to do with how the agricultural economy is reorganized. You're right. I've never heard of real industrial scale or hobby. You know what? You do have a lot of hobby farming in the suburbs around Tokyo.
Mhm.
That's actually very popular. Old people will get a plot and they'll actually pay rent on it, and they'll go and grow their vegetables on it for themselves. But that's probably not what you're talking about either, Dan H. I think the New York style, what you see in America, the sort of big urban farming stuff, I haven't heard of. But
One
yeah,
of the people who's doing urban farming in New York is actually a former Tokyo resident. He was the co-founder of
all
Gengo.com,
right.
the online translation site. And so he left the company and he took his wad of cash from that and he went to New York and he has a vertical farm, like in Brooklyn, making like microgreens for restaurants and I think they have delivery services, etc. So he lived in Tokyo for a really long time. I wonder if he'll make a branch of his company in Tokyo, but he's very successful in New York.
That could be his next million isn't what it used to be. So I guess we'd say that could be his next 100 million. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Well,
I want
mm,
these comments because I really like it. It's from Minhat Takahashi. Our
yeah,
politicians are the reflections of us citizens. Oops. Oh no. We are also here. We are. We are also responsible for what is really happening. We should not only blame our leaders, but should become more involved as responsible citizens. Yes, that is exactly it. So I'm trying to do that myself. Um,
yeah. And another comment from Minhut just added, find it disappointing that legal professionals have not shown support for this cause to save the trees to be cut in the Gaien area, probably because they are aware that legally the plan passes. Possibly, I don't know. I think you'll find actually as activists go, lawyers are disproportionately represented in Japan on all sorts of things, on immigration issues, on on voting rights, on gay marriage, and so on. You'll find there are always lawyers groups that are doing those. Perhaps this is another area that perhaps, yeah, it's worth. In fact, it might actually be, Rochelle, you and your activist friends might want to consider a meeting with the Lawyers Association, the Nichibenrin, because they
mm-hmm,
are very active on social sort of issues and
right.
lobbying, and maybe they can support on this. I haven't seen them prominently on this, but I assume just from the lawyers I know that
Right.
there probably are some involved.
Right. When we've talked about a little bit among the activists and um basically I think what we would like to try and find one who would like to be a lead plaintiff
Mm,
because it's hard for myself or the other activists who are already working on it to take we different person. One, because I'm already kind of prominent, and since I'm not Japanese, that's an issue too. For the
mm,
Japanese activists, who, as I mentioned, they've been doing Chinjo show and Yobo show, and they've been trying to work the system. And if
mm,
the same people do a lawsuit, then they can't try and work with the system.
mm.
So it needs to be someone else to be the plaintiff. So if anyone knows a Japanese person who might be willing to be a lead plaintiff, that
Ah,
would be really helpful.
my Japanese lawyer friends will tell you there are lots of retired Japanese people who love being plaintiffs just as a hobby.
Uh-huh.
that,
Well,
that
please
may,
send them to me, and we'll give them a cause. Because seriously,
sure.
we feel like we need some different person.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a good suggestion. Thank you for that, Minhat Takahashi. We've
Yes.
been talking for 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 47 seconds. So I will wrap it up. But thank you for going through all of this and
Well, thanks for
being patient with
listening.
my. Yeah, yeah. What you're saying makes actually a lot of sense. While I am default, I like new shiny things. At the same time, it's good to understand where these shiny things are coming from and that they can be done better. And you're definitely showing that this is like a case study of not doing things the right way. So yeah, I'll be actually very interested in following this now. So thank you for the explanation.
Well, thanks, and thanks for listening, and thanks for willing to be persuaded.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I must admit, I'm really going to be following the next environmental assessment of this and how they're going to explain the trees. Like to me, if they can move the trees, like that's a big thing. Like, I'm less
Mhm.
worked up about the stadiums and stuff like that. I am worked up if they've made a plan that they haven't even, that they expect to fail or that is clearly going to fail. And if that's the case, that invalidates part of the plan. So
Right, right,
I'm
right.
really curious to see
Exactly.
how
Yeah.
that goes. But the corruption
Yeah.
angle as well is actually this could be in the news. It sounds like this will continue to be in the news. So yeah, thank you for getting us up to speed. I'm going
Oh,
to
you're
wrap it
welcome.
up there. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining and thanks for all the comments and questions and so on. And I'll be back with the regular Tokyo Tonight soon. Probably Rochelle and I, we spontaneously in the pre-show thought we should do a like Japan Business Time pandemic edition. There's definitely plenty of material for that. So we'll hopefully do something around that sometime soon. So stay tuned and I'll talk to you all later.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Cool. I'm going to end the broadcast. Boom.